talk to you about a journalist I raised with you last week, an Australian journalist who disgraced himself in London. He was a brash leftist journalist who loved to bash News Corp and Conservatives while sucking up to the left and the publicly funded journalists at the ABC and the like. And you know what happens when you behave like that, don't you? Yes, you get to have some fun at the expense of hard-working Australian taxpayers.
And in this election year, we'll be keeping a close eye on how the social media impacts on politics. To help us out with all of that, we'll be calling on some special expertise from that BuzzFeed guy.
Yeah, Barry, that's me, Mark Di Stefano, political editor at BuzzFeed. I'm here to try and make sense of what's happening on the internet and how it's changing politics.
Oh, well, neither BuzzFeed nor insiders seem to give Di Stefano much of a grounding in ethics or responsible behaviour, because while working for the Financial Times in the UK, he allegedly hacked into a Zoom meeting of rival papers, The Independent and the Evening Standard, spying on discussions about pay cuts and threats to jobs and reporting them in his paper. Another paper, The Telegraph, says he might have broken at least 2 data protection laws, reporting that legal experts have suggested that Mr Di Stefano may have broken the Computer Misuse Act 1990, which can carry a jail sentence of up to a year. There's no suggestion at this stage that any criminal proceedings will be triggered, but Di Stefano has quit his job in shame. He tweeted, "Hi, letting everyone know today was my last day at the FT. This afternoon I offered my resignation. Thank you to everyone who has given support. I'm now going to take some time away and log off. Kiss." Now, given the way his actions would have seemed to have trashed journalistic ethics and standards, what is staggering is the number of senior journalists who have offered support to Di Stefano. Unconditional support. Now, sure, if he's their friend, they might want to comfort him, but surely if they got any consideration for their profession, their craft, they need to admonish him over what's gone on, or at least accept the seriousness of the allegations. Nope. None other than former ABC host and now head of journalism at the University of Technology, Sydney, Monica Attard, she tweeted, "Take care, Mark. You'll be back." Saturday paper cartoonist John Kudelka portrayed Di Stefano as a victim. "Plot your revenge, sir. I look forward to it." And Nine newspaper columnist and former Labor Party spin doctor Sean Kelly said, "I'm sorry, mate, this seems like a poor result, unjustified, with the whole thing an overblown reaction." Really? Hacking your competitors as they're faced with grim news about their jobs? The reaction to this is overblown? And another prominent progressive commentator, George Megalogenis, was very forgiving. "Sorry to see you go, Mark. Looking forward to your return." This is extraordinary, isn't it? Why would journalists who were rightly outraged about hacking at the now defunct News of the World be so forgiving when it comes to Di Stefano? Well, here's a clue. Listen to him on a podcast from a year or two back.
You've got Andrew Bolt, you've then got a weird hour between 8 and 9, which is like a rotating one, and then between 9 and 11, Paul Murray, and between 11 and 12, you've got this really weird show hosted by Chris Kenny, where he has fellow News Corp people on to talk about what's in the News Corp papers the next day, and it really does. I mean, this should be said though, on those panel shows, it really is just constant talk. On those panel shows, they do have left-wing voices, they do have progressive voices, they do have Labor people on, but the overwhelming majority of those monologues and the stuff that they try to push out onto online does come from the more conservative side of politics.
The horror, hey? His tribalism, of course, leads him to get his facts wrong. As you know, we've always featured competitor journalists and newspapers here on the front page and Heads Up. But the key there was that he was attacking this station, even though he had to admit that, unlike others, we give all points of view an airing. Di Stefano didn't like the fact we might have opinion shows here that are right of centre. The horror. Media in touch with mainstream values. You see, it's because Di Stefano favours the Green left and attacks the right of centre voices that he's given a leave pass by other journalists when it comes to ethics. The double standards are as blatant and as common as that. Hacking is deplorable, except when it's done by leftist journalists. This was called out boldly by a freelance journalist in the UK, Michael Hann, who writes for an ideologically diverse spread of The Guardian, The The Spectator and The Economist tweeted, "I tend not to want to criticise my trade, but I'm very surprised and disappointed by the number of big-name journalists sympathising with Mark Di Stefano. I don't know him and have no axe to grind, but what he did was awful and bad for journalism when so many distrust it." Well said. It's that obvious and clear-cut. Just one postscript on Di Stefano, though. Have a look at this profile in the Media Week trade magazine about how well Di Stefano was doing in London. The young Australian boasted, I would not have got to where I am in the 10 years from first joining the ABC without Twitter." No doubt it's true that Di Stefano's career has focused more on his social media profile than real journalism. That probably isn't anything to boast about. More likely, that's the heart of his problem. Let's bring in a fantastic panel now. Joining us from Perth is Gemma Tognini. From Sydney is James Morrow. And from I'm not certain where is Nick Cater. He's in Sydney as well. Good to see all of you. Let's hear from you first, Gemma. What do we think about Mark Di Stefano and the way other journalists have responded to his travails?
Well, it was curious, Chris. I thought it was very curious, and as someone who grew up in a newsroom long before Twitter, long before any social media. In fact, hint for the viewers, the first story I ever wrote was on a typewriter because I'm that old. But you want to be good at your craft and you want to have the respect of your peers. And there's something to be said for being in that generation when news gathering was about pounding the pavement and hitting the phones and having to face people on their doorstep, knock on their door and convince them to trust you with information, trust them with a photograph of someone that they loved or was dear to them. That is part of the skill of the craft, but also the respect for the craft. And if there's one thing I want to talk about more broadly about Twitter and the social media aspect of news gathering, it has really cheapened aspects of news gathering. There are parts of it that have become easy, they've circumnavigated that person-to-person interaction. You can lift a photo off Facebook, you can lift something off Twitter, you can do all of these things that remove that process by which you need to gain the trust of the person that you're wanting to interact with, and I just think this is terrible. And you know, you can take out the word hacking in so much as your last comment, Chris, about, you know, hacking is all right with but only the people from the left, you know, only those who are in their sort of camp. But you could put any indiscretion into that sentence, you know, whether it's hacking, whether it's something else. It is so utterly tribal, and I just, you know, if it was me and if it was you, can you just imagine the reaction? It would have been absolutely apocalyptic.
Yeah, spot
and for
on.
the record, Chris, I was one of your first guests on Heads Up, and I'm not a News Corp journalist talking about News Corp papers, and I never was. So let's correct him there again.
Spot on. We all did those late nights. You ought to get it right.
We sure did.
We used to love spruiking the Fairfax papers. We used to always say on that program, subscribe to papers, any papers. Keep
Absolutely.
Journalists in jobs. Nick, this double standard is the key here, right? You know, you've got to stand up for principle. And what was shocking at News of the World is shocking when someone else does it from another company.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, this is about ethics. I mean, as you and I would know, we used to have an AJA, Australian Journalists Association Code of Ethics, which, you know, it was like the Bible. It was like the Ten Commandments. You know, that's what you followed, and we followed the rule, which is, you know, that the first and only duty of a reporter is to give his editor the truth. Full stop. Right, and to do that in a way that doesn't impinge on people's privacy or trick them or somehow. I mean, that was just standard. At one stage. Now, unfortunately, with social media, as Gemma's pointed out, these things have changed. People think that they can do journalism another way, which is all right. But what's happened is now you've got this tribalism that's kept in, you know, my truth versus your truth. Plus, I think, you know, a declining trust in the media, because in the end, that's the result of this. You know, this sort of thing just it drops people's trust in the media even further and makes running a serious media business harder.
Yeah, and this is what staggers me, James. Then everybody knows that's what's at stake. So why don't some of these significant journos who still want to be mates with him just say, chin up, mate, but it looks like a big error, or chin up, mate, but this sort of stuff's not on. I mean, apparently he just plugged into this Zoom conference call. Now, this is personal, private information. You can't hack into that. And why don't they take that stand as well as support him as a mate, perhaps?
Well, look, Chris, I mean, we're looking at a point right now where journalism is on the nose. It's on the nose in the community. It's on the nose as a business proposition. And here we are with some clown like Mark Di Stefano going out there and acting like this. And then doubling down on it, you have people like Monica Attard, who is training the next generation of journalists at UTS, coming out and saying, oh, no, it's all perfectly okay. Gemma is absolutely right. It's tribal. Nick's right. It's tribal, but it's also another word. It's sleazy. And this guy has had a long record. When this came out, there was a long record of people saying, this guy's a stitch-up artist. You know, he direct messaged everybody in my contacts on Facebook trying to get information on me and write a hit piece. All sorts of people have said things like this. On the weekend, there was a great piece by Jen Albrechtsen about the state of our universities, and she talked about UTS and the communication school there and how it had just become this entirely left-wing indoctrination kind of ground. And we're just, seeing so much more of what happens when you get this tribalism. It is horrible for journalism when you have this double standard. It's horrible for the community because the community needs journalism at a time when we are in all of these various crises. We need people to give the facts to us straight and not be playing it off a break. I think what Mark did is terrible, but I think what the people in his tribe have been doing in response to it has been even worse. And every one of us who is either a journalist or cares about journalism is in the frame because of it.